Hello, everybody. This is Rob Fredette with the podcast Hodgepod, and welcome. A unbelievable topic tonight, talking about music, but this is an inside look into the rock and roll world. I have a great guest on my podcast. Lori Tucker-Sullivan is my guest. She is the author of the book, I Can't Remember If I Cried, Rock Widows on Life, Love, and Legacy. So I am really looking forward to talking to you, Lori. And Lori, welcome to Hodgepod.
Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, ma'am. So I always like to have my guests introduce themselves just to set everything up. And then we can talk about your book and some of the findings and your interviews and how you went about writing it. So if you could just please introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Lori Tucker-Sullivan. I am an educator in the city of Detroit. I work at Wayne State University, which is right in the middle of the city. Love living here. And of course, it is, feel, the music capital of the world. You certainly couldn't grow up in the city without being in love with music and having it as, in every part of your life. So I came to music pretty early, loved writing about music. I thought I would do that as a career. And then my life went in a little bit of a different direction. And after my husband passed away in 2010, I thought it would be a way to kind of come back to that first love and kind of get me through that grief time. And so this is where I ended up writing this book and working on this book. So that's a little bit about me. Love to write, love music. I don't actually play music, and neither did my husband. That's a common question that I get. So we have a beautiful piano here, and the kids are musical. So,
You know what? I'm like you. I am a music lover. I couldn't tell you what a chord is. I can't tell you what a melody is, but I do know when I love music. And you're in Detroit, and I'm in Memphis, the king of rock and roll, Elvis
There we
Presley
go.
from here. So I tell you what, Detroit and Memphis are like the places where music actually started. But yes, Detroit with Motown and obviously Bob Seger from there, right? Detroit.
Yep. Iggy Pop,
Iggy
Eminem.
Pop,
Yeah, lots of music here in the city. Yeah,
wow.
in addition to Motown. Yeah.
Yes. Iggy Pop, you brought up one from the late 70s, early 80s. Wow.
Yes.
All right. So your book is quite fascinating because you've talked to widows, girlfriends, or wives of rock stars who passed away. So what was that like, getting that inspiration for the book? Because you got some A-listers, spouses or girlfriends that you spoke to. So what was that like with the conception and then actually getting to writing and interviewing those wives and girlfriends?
Well, so I started out after my husband passed away. I was really looking for something to kind of bring me through my grief. I knew it would be returning to writing. I knew music would be in there somewhere. I had started working on my master's in creative writing before my husband became sick, and took time off from that while we were caring for him. And he had head and neck cancer. And so it was about a 2.5 year ordeal that we went through. And so I took time off from school during that time and then went back to it. And I was on my way to my last class and heard a story on the radio about Yoko Ono. And I thought, I really think differently of her now than I did, maybe 15 or 20 years ago. Now I think of her as a fellow widow, and I see how much she has accomplished, raising their son, keeping the music out there, dealing with legacy. And then I started thinking that there must be other women because, as we were talking about earlier, so many of them were so young when they passed away. And so I knew that there had to be a group of women out there who had stories that I had never heard before. So a few of us went out to the bar after class, and I took my laptop and I said, if I can come up with a list of like 8 or 9, I think I would have something. And I want to start the project. And if it becomes a book, great. If it doesn't, I think it's going to still be an amazing experience. And at the end of the night, I had a list of, I think, about 22 that were, some of them I had looked into a little bit even, and the stories were so compelling. Gloria Jones was the first interview that I did. And she was one of the first people that I had researched, and her story was just amazing. And I couldn't believe that, as someone who has, been involved in music or read about music and listened to music, I never heard the story of her. And, she was a singer and songwriter in her own right. And she was married to Mark Bolan, or I'm sorry, not married, but was the girlfriend of Mark Bolan. And it convinced me that there was a lot here that I could find. And each person that I looked into, the stories just became more and more amazing. And the idea that they had never been out there before just both intrigued me and kind of frustrated me that, these women were still in the shadows. And so I felt compelled at that point. And at that point, I just started reaching out, sometimes by social media.
Mhm.
A few times I sent a handwritten letter to someone. I would find an address and take a chance and send a letter. And a few days later, I'd get a phone call. It was, I would say there were so I did 22 interviews total. 14 of them made it into the book. And there were probably 28 or 29 women that I reached out to. And so some did say no, but for the most part, they said yes. They were eager to, tell their stories, and they hadn't told them previously because no one had ever asked. And I still can't believe that. But
Unbelievable.
it really is. They have these fascinating stories, but they also have, never heard before stories and details, and no one was closer to them really quite often. And so it really just, I was shocked that that was the case. And so I did 8 or 9 interviews before I got a book deal. And I just worked at it and did the interviews, met the women. They all became kind of my very special grief group. And that in and of itself was enough, for me. If it had never become a book, just the project itself was so, it really did save me. I've said many times that it was a life-saving and life-changing experience. Yeah.
That's fascinating because while I was doing research for this book, for this podcast last week, I don't know if it's an algorithm on Facebook. Something popped up about it was the anniversary of Mark Bolan passing away in a car crash with Gloria Jones. And I don't know if that's an
Yes.
algorithm on my phone or not, but it was fascinating. And T Rex, of course, sang that song Bang a Gong. So, and some other great songs, but he was 29. I mean, it's amazing when you look back at these singers, they're so young.
Yes, they were. So many of them were very young. And oftentimes the women were even younger. They were early 20s, 16 or 17 when they met. So yeah, the youth of this, and how much we've lost when you really think about, what more all of these musicians could have done. It's really, it's pretty sad to think about that. But yeah. And that is a very, Gloria and Mark's story is quite fascinating, and how it all happened and how she was treated and all of those things.
So, who was the first person that said yes? And what was that like when you got your first yes?
So Gloria was the first
Okay.
yes. And I had reached out to her on social media. I write in the book that someone had posted on her Facebook page something not very nice about her, intimating that she was the cause of Mark's death, which she still deals with 40, 50 years later, which is unbelievable. So much of this is pretty unbelievable. But so I sent her a message, I think on Facebook. Didn't really expect to, didn't know if I would hear back or not. I had reached out to 2 or 3 people about the same time, and I got a call very early one morning, and there's a string of numbers across my phone. So it's, clearly not a local call. And I pick it up and I say hello. And she said, "Lori, this is Gloria. I'm calling you from Sierra Leone. Next week, I'm going to be in LA. Meet me." And so I
Wow.
did. So I got on a plane
Awesome.
and I met her.
Cool.
and,
Cool.
and I met her in a hotel on Sunset. And she grabbed my hand and she said, let's go have some fun. And we went to the Troubadour, we went to the Rainbow Room. She told me stories about, that was the time of John Lennon's Lost Weekend. And so he was out there with Harry Nilsson and Alice Cooper, and all of these people would just hang out. And the story she told, it was about a 4-hour interview. And it just, I mean, after that, I said, this is my life's work. These
amazing.
stories are just amazing. And yeah, and she is now living in Sierra Leone, West Africa. She divides her time, I believe, between Sierra Leone and the States, and sometimes in London. But she runs the Mark Bolan School of Music and Film in Sierra Leone. And she really traveled there to try to find some peace around this, because she was driving the car and has faced, the wrath of fans and others, for many, many years. And she was completely exonerated. And, it was to hear her story. We were both in tears a few different points. And then really what she most wanted to talk about was the children she cares for and educates in the school. And so she was just a fascinating person. She was a songwriter on her, in her own right. She was nominated for a Grammy for If I Were Your Woman, which she wrote for Gladys Knight and the Pips. And so she had her own career. She was a background singer and became a background singer for Mark and T-Rex. And that's how they met. So, and that's a fairly common thread through the book, is that there were women who had careers of their own, either in the music business or not, and quite often kind of gave them up, or at least set them aside to manage these men. And that's what they did. There was a lot of management of personalities and, bad habits and lots of other things.
So that is a fascinating story. I've never been around rock stars behind the scenes, but I can just probably tell just by looking from the outside, it's a very grueling business. Number one, with the travel and, your stories of partying back in the day, and they probably still do today, but you always have to have that on in your brain all the time. Did they ever, like when you were talking to some of the wives or girlfriends, did they ever have time to shut it off? Because when they're in front of the fans, you got to be on all the time. So did they ever have times where they felt like they got away from it?
I don't think they did. And I think, one of the kind of realizations that I came to over the 7 years, it took 7 years to write the book and find a publisher, do all of that. And over the course of that time, I really did develop a sense of just kind of care and concern for these men, even the ones who did get involved in drugs or who died of drug overdoses, because you find out that they were not kind of the superstars that we think they are. They were many times shy or, just creative. And then they're thrust on the stage, and there are thousands of people in front of them, and they're making a lot of money. And they're being told that they're, the best thing ever. And all of that messes with your head. Like I understand now how there was quite often this impossible situation created. And the only way you get up there every night and perform like you do, and then get in a bus and drive for 10 hours and then, get up the next day and do it again. I mean, it was physically grueling as well. And years of touring. Ingrid Croce talked about just going months and months without seeing Jim at all. And how do you cope with that? And it really was, I think it is less so now. I think the artists understand the need for rest.
Yeah.
And I think they kind of weigh in a little bit more and set the terms a little bit better. But so many of these young men would just do anything. They would sign any contract without looking, without reading too closely. And they would stay on the road for years because they wanted that, that ring. They wanted to, be the superstar, and that's what it took. And they were making money for everybody too. So, they were just put out there in pretty difficult circumstances.
Wow.
And so I really feel, I do feel more, I just feel like I understand a little bit more why they ended up sometimes the way they did.
Hmm. Some of the artists that you cover in the book either died through tragedy or drug overdoses. I mean, all tragedy. But Stevie Ray Vaughan, I remember that in 1990, like it was yesterday, a helicopter crash, and then there was a few other people in the entourage that were also on the helicopter. I was a huge Stevie Ray Vaughan fan, and what was that like talking to his girlfriend?
It was it was a wonderful experience to talk to Jana. We met, and she was living in Florida at the time. She now lives back in New Zealand. She was originally from New Zealand. And it's a very difficult story because she, was not really a part of, despite the fact that they lived together for about 5 years, was not a part of kind of his life and decision making after he died. She just was told to move on, and that was difficult for her. She met Stevie Ray when she was 16, and they spent a couple days together in New Zealand when he was there on tour. She hopped on a plane and went with the band and Stevie Ray to Australia and was with him during that tour. And then he moved on. He went on, and he was in the midst of his divorce from his first wife, and that was difficult for him. He was certainly battling addiction issues at that time. And Ajana had herself had some issues in her earlier years with anorexia. And so she understood, how you have to understand that you are sometimes helpless against some of these things. And so she really understood that side of Stevie, and they kind of kept in touch. They lost touch for a little while. He would reach out to her every once in a while, especially if he was, really feeling down. And then he became very ill when they were on tour in Germany and realized that he was going to die if he didn't get the addiction under control. And he checked himself into a hospital in London with the help of Eric Clapton. And the first call he made was to his mother, and the second call he made was to Jana. And at that point, she was 18, and she dropped everything and was with him for the next 5 years. And afterwards, when, there was kind of this denial that they had a relationship, she really felt compelled to kind of prove that wasn't true, that they definitely had a loving relationship. And she had taken Polaroid photos. Stevie Ray had a Polaroid camera, and he would take pictures and send them to her, put them in an envelope and send them to her as part of their courting. And he kept that. And she also had a camera. And so she documented their 5 years together in a book. And to see the photos of the two of them and how happy and in love they were, there's never a photo with the two of them that Stevie Ray isn't, just beaming and smiling. And so that was her way of kind of proving that she was there. She was a part of his life, and she really did help him stay clean. She understood that he needed to be dedicated to that, and she didn't want him to shy away from talking about it in interviews or even on stage. And so she was really a support system for him. And yeah. And what she went through after he passed away was really unfortunate.
Yeah, I remember that vividly when I heard on the radio. Back then, there was no phones or anything like that. You heard on the radio, it was just
Right.
pure shock, and it was like a gut
Yeah.
punch. It's like when these movie stars or but rock stars, they're like part of your family, even though they're far away in the distance, because we have that connection with their music. It's kind of like losing a part of your family when a musician or somebody in a band dies, because it's like, they're part of your life, and then all you have is the memories of their albums and their singing. Isn't that amazing how music can really like get us through things or get us through a day?
Yes, yeah. And it is connected to, so many important times in our lives. And so it, it, I will say, having done these interviews, I've seen the other side of fandom and how intrusive it can be as well. When my husband passed away, no one told me what his service should be like. No one came after me for his things. No one, sued me. Like, and that's, a part of what they have dealt with after their loss. And fans are part of that. There are fans that are, especially now with social media, that can just be out there saying terrible things. And that's really hard for them to deal with, hard for the widows to deal with. But yes, it is. We have, I think, a connection to music in general, and we have specific connections to, the music that we really loved, especially when we were younger, and that got us through those times growing up, good times and bad times.
Yeah.
And you do feel a connection to those people. They're your people. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I know when Eddie Van Halen passed away back, 2020, I just listened to Van Halen, their first album, and I just tuned out everything and listened to his guitar riffs throughout that whole album. It was just like, you lose a part of your family. I never met him, but
Yeah.
that's just the
Yeah.
way it goes. So
Yeah. For me, it was Queen. Queen was,
yeah,
favorite band as a teenager. And when Freddie Mercury died, I was actually pregnant with my son. He died in November, and my son was born in January. So I was pretty pregnant. And just to sit and listen to that music and think about those teen years, and what did I dream of then, and where am I now, and how different our lives are. I owned a house, I'm having a kid, I'm married. How, just completely different than what I had thought of when I was 15 or 16, and, just wanting to go out and see the world. And, you really do go back and reflect. I think, that music takes you back to those times. And so it is very powerful.
yeah. Stevie Ray Vaughan was 35 years old. And then
Yeah.
September 7th, 1978, Keith Moon passed away. I remember watching the movie Tommy when I was a youngster. That was a great movie. I still remember the soundtrack for The Who. But Keith Moon, was he a party animal, or was he a heavy partier?
He was, yeah. Although, I think Annette would say that she knew someone who was not just a partier. They had, again, about a 5-year relationship. And she talked about how they had met once before. She's very beautiful and model. Several of these women were models. So, and he had run into her maybe the second or third time they had met, out to dinner at a kind of discotheque and in London, and she was on a date, and a man walked up and grabbed the arm of her date and escorted him out, and then came and got her and took her over to Keith's table and said, "This is where you'll be this evening." And she went home that night to his apartment, and that was it. That was it. So yeah.
Yeah, that's wow.
But, she would talk about how, they would have to go away. They would go away, I want to say maybe Tahiti. They would go away to, kind of a tropical place where he was away from the music, and he was just a completely different person. He was quiet. He was more kind of reflective and just very loving. But it was when he got around the music and just almost portraying someone, that he really wanted to be noticed. He certainly had most likely ADHD. He had his mind worked in a different way. And we didn't understand those kinds of things then either. So yeah, so he was, I think, a little misunderstood. I think she would say there were two different people. There was the Keith on stage and there was the Keith off stage. And yeah, Yeah, but quite a life. And again, I think 18 or 19 when they met, and dealing with this stuff, that's quite a lot to deal with.
Yeah. The Who obviously came in through the British invasion and lasted. They're still playing to these days,
Yeah, yeah.
concerts. And I remember somewhat when Keith Moon passed away, but truly, Who really didn't come out with an album. I remember they came out with an album in the early 80s, but they never really recorded music after that. Really quite fascinating. Like when that one of the key parts of a band leaves, they maybe go on a little bit and then they stop because
Yeah.
you lose that component of the band.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, and there were in Keith's case, I think there was some division in the band about keeping him or letting him loose because he had had all of these run-ins and destroying hotel rooms and all of that. And it was really, I believe it was Pete who said, "We got to keep him. We can't just let him go." And they did keep him in the band. And yeah, yeah, it's and afterwards, it is. I think it's never quite the same. I've seen Queen, I think 11 times now in various forms, and I've seen them with Adam Lambert and even Paul Rogers from Bad Company toured with them soon after, I think their first tour after Freddie died. And it's great. I love being in the stadium and hearing the music, but it really is not the same. It just, and I think the dynamics between the band members aren't the same. And so it really is interesting to watch and see how they deal with it and whether they go on, and there are a lot of legal issues that enter into it as well.
You had mentioned about bands. Bands have tensions, and there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes. So that's another facet that we see them on stage or we see them in interviews. They're all smiling, but there can be some tension in the back.
Oh yes.
There in the back there where people don't see that.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the most fascinating stories for me is the Leonard Skinner story. And Judy Van Zant is just, man, a strong, strong woman for all that she has been through. And that particular band, and something I wasn't aware of until that interview actually, is that many bands are organized as a corporation, as a C corporation, and each band member owns a share of stock. And so if you leave the band, you have to either give your share back, have your share bought out by the other band members, or have someone new buy that share. And they really kind of formed that way because they saw themselves as this tight group, and they all wanted to have some decision making, but they all deferred to Ronnie because he was the founder of the band. He was a real taskmaster. He got them, they had this little house out in the woods, and he took them out there every day and made them practice. And there would be no Leonard Skinner without Ronnie. That's, I think most of the band members would have said that as well. And when they had the crash, they lost 3 band members, and the surviving band members got together with Judy at her home and said, "That's it. The band ended with Ronnie. We will never tour again. We'll never be Leonard Skinner again." And she said, "If you want to form a new band with a new name and go out and make new music, I won't stop you from doing that. I understand that you need to do that, but no Leonard Skinner." And they all agreed to that. And 10 years after the crash, a promoter came along and said, "You guys could be making a lot of money out here." And so they agreed that they'd go out and do 10 dates on the 10-year anniversary. And they came back and said, "We really are making a lot of money, so we are going to keep going out there. We're going to be Leonard Skinner again. And that share that passed to you from Ronnie, we're going to buy you out. We're going to kick you out of the corporation. And that's that." And she said, "We messed with the wrong person." And she sued
Oh,
them. She had to sue them. And it was not a quick case. It took a little while. I write in the book about how she said that she was going to be in court every day. And the other band members were not. They sent their attorneys. but she was there every day. And she said, I'd go at lunchtime into the bathroom and throw up. And she got down to about 90 pounds. Like it really took a toll on her, but she won in the end. And she still gets a little piece of everything, as she should have. That's what Ronnie wanted. Ronnie had children, and so they were protected as well. And that was, she was going to protect his legacy.
Hmm.
So yeah, and there is, both with Judy and with Ingrid Croce, with Jim's case, there is entertainment law that is written about both of those cases. And it was precedent setting stuff. So yeah, and some very strong-willed women that went through a lot.
Yeah, Ronnie Van Zant. I think that's one of the great rock and roll names. I love that name. He was 29 years old. That was on October 20th, 1977. And while I was just getting ready for this podcast episode, Keith Moon and Warren Zevon died on the same day but different year, which I found to be interesting. Warren Zevon died September 7th, 2003. Keith Moon, September 7th, 1978. And Warren Zevon, 56. 56 is so young.
Yes. And I will say my husband, who was a huge Warren Zevon fan, died on September 7th, 2010. So one of the little oddities there about the book. But yeah, 3 people that are written about in the book all died on the same date, but different years. So yeah. Yeah. And Warren was one of the tougher stories for me, because we both loved his music so much. And I think I was probably the only woman my husband dated who knew who Warren Zevon was. And we saw him multiple times, and it was hard when he passed away. My husband took it pretty hard. We just loved his music a lot. And so when I first made this list of people that were possibilities, I kind of prioritized it by music that we really loved, or music that I knew Kevin really loved. And so Warren went pretty much to the top of the list. And talking with Crystal, I learned that they had a very difficult relationship, and Warren was physically abusive. He also suffered from some alcohol issues, pretty bad alcohol issues, actually. And she stayed with him. To a certain point, I mean, she left, and they had been divorced for several years. Actually, she moved back to the East Coast. She had moved out to the West Coast, Vermont, to run the fan club for the Cowsills. I don't know if you remember the Cowsills. They were a late 60s, maybe into 71, 72 family band. The Partridge Family was kind of modeled after the real life Cowsills family band. But she had come out to do that, and she was dating Waddy Wachtel, who was a session guitarist. And then Waddy introduced her to Warren, and it was just an immediate connection. And that was it. A few months later, they were living together. And when she left, it really was for her own kind of health. She knew she couldn't stay with him because his problems were kind of becoming worse. And so they were apart for quite a while, although they would always talk to each other on the phone. He would call her. She said he called her a couple of times when he was lost and physically lost someplace, and he would ask her for directions and she'd have to kind of get him back home from where he was. And then when he got his stage 4 diagnosis, the first phone call he made was to Crystal and said, you're the wife, you got to come take care of me. And she kind of chose not to do that. She went out and they spent some time together, but she knew for both of them that was not, the best thing to do. And he really willed himself they gave him, I think, about 3 or 4 months, and he lived for almost a year, and willed himself to stick around to finish an album. That was what he wanted to do at the end. And then also their daughter was expecting twins, and he wanted to meet those twin boys, and he did that. And then he passed away after that. And she still, it's one of my favorite passages in the book where she talks about one of the things that he asked of her before he died was that she write his biography. And he had boxes and boxes of journals that he kept, and he would write about a mustard that he tried on a sandwich. And then he would also write something profound, and he would write lyrics. And so she went through all of these journals. She interviewed people who worked with him, Jackson Browne and many others that worked with him, and compiled this book. And she said that after he died, she knew she couldn't move on until she completed this book. And she went through the journals, and all this lovely writing was there, but also all of his transgressions were there. And she said it was really like Warren punching her in the face all over again. And yeah, it was not easy, but she knew she had to do it. And she had promised him, and she did. And she said afterwards, she realized that it was like his one last request for forgiveness and absolution. And she did. And she forgave him, and now she just loves him and misses him.
Hmm.
And it's not a lot of women would do that either, would forgive. And she did. And it's really a lovely love story between the two of them.
Yeah, that is amazing. And also, you just mentioned Jackson Browne. There was a stretch like there from the 60s probably to the 90s. All these musicians collaborate. I never thought like Warren Zevon and Jackson Browne in the same sentence. It's amazing how they all intertwine and get together or collaborate.
Cross-pollinate kind of. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
wild.
That whole kind of Southern California, the Laurel Canyon area, it was just just this amazing area where all of this talent kind of flocked to at one time. Graham Parsons is a part of that, and he's also in the book. That was an early interview that I did. What a magical time and place to be, to have all of this music coming out of that area.
So what was it like writing the book as you were going along? Did you feel like was it cathartic for you to write about these wives and girlfriends and having lost your husband and having your love for music? How was that going through writing the book? And when you finished it, how did you feel?
I felt a great sense of accomplishment. Again, I feel like in part, it's kind of part of my mission now to get these stories out there. The book does weave through some of both my love of music. I come in and out. There are things that I learn from each of the widows, and I relate that back to my own marriage, to talk about forgiveness or to talk about kind of dreams set aside. There were, several topics that came up. I always felt like I walked away from an interview kind of learning about something. One of my earliest interviews was with Peggy Sue Honeyman Scott. She was married to James Honeyman Scott from the Pretenders, and just met backstage. It was a fluke at the very last minute. They got tickets to go see the Pretenders in Austin. She went in and then bumped into someone she knew who happened to be working with the band. And so she went backstage and meets Jimmy, pulls her down on his lap. And a journalist asks, "Is this your wife?" And he says, "No, but she's going to be." And they talked on the phone. He called her from all of his stops and then sent her a ticket when they were in Chicago. And really, for the next 2 years, they traveled the world. They were on tour constantly, and she was with him most of that time. And I was sitting with her in her living room, and she's telling me this story. And I said, "I have to interrupt because 17-year-old me is so jealous of you." And it's all I ever wanted was to walk backstage and have a guitar player grab me and say, "This is it. Let's go on the road." And she said, wait a minute. Like, how long were you married? And I said, "Well, almost 26 years. And she said, I had 2.5. I had 2.5 years with the love of my life. Don't talk to me about being jealous." And it really, like, we still talk to each other quite frequently on the
Sure.
phone. It could have ended. It could have ended the whole project, really. That insensitivity that I never realized. And so many of these relationships were brief. They were 2, 3, 4 years. Some of them were longer, but again, they were also young. And so it was a real lesson for me there that I had my rock star, and I had my really good life with a really good person, and be careful what you wish for, maybe, or understand what you already have. So all of these interviews have been kind of learning experiences for me, and that really came out as I was writing them, and I just, I'm just so grateful for all of these women for spending the time and sharing the stories. It's really been an amazing experience.
Elvis Presley, I'm here in Memphis. He died when he was 42. He'd be like 88 or 89 now.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
it boggles the mind. We're so used to seeing them when they were young. And then there was Kurt Cobain and Jim Morrison. They passed away when they were 27. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin.
Quite a
Um,
few at
yeah,
27.
and it's just like what I always think, like, what would happen if like the Doors kept playing? What kind of music would they? We mentioned that earlier in this episode here, and it's quite amazing when you look back at just how young they were, but just like the pressures that they were under all the time. It's just wasn't, like I said, it just never shuts off for them.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and when I started, my kids were, I would say, maybe 23 and 26 or 27, around there. And I would just think, like, I can't imagine my daughter having these relationships with someone and at that age. And it's, you don't realize, I think, how young they were until you start hearing these stories, and to understand then that this is a 26 or 27-year-old who suddenly has a lot of money, a lot of adoration, a lot of people giving them whatever they want, women throwing themselves at them. It's just too much, I think, in many ways. I don't know how anyone got through it and did, as well as they did. We do still have some people in their 70s and 80s. We still have Ringo and Paul McCartney, and how they survived those times really is pretty amazing when you understand the full scope of what they were experiencing.
Yeah, the Beatles were like 20, 21, 22 at the height
Yeah,
of fame.
yeah,
And like, I wasn't even thinking about music, being a musician. I was just trying to
right.
go to college.
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty amazing. It's when I was thinking about my daughter and how I can't imagine her at 21 or 22. That's the Graham Parsons story that I go back to. And Gretchen Parsons Carpenter was 18, 19, I think 19 when she met him at a party with the Rolling Stones. He's very good looking. He's very talented, just a Southern gentleman, Harvard educated, trust fund. He's got it all, and wants to live a dangerous life too. And she got pulled into that. And at one point, she is on the phone screaming to her father to please come help her with Graham. And Vera Ramon, same kind of situation with Dee Dee Ramone. There, he's locked in a bathroom and she doesn't know what to do. And at 3 a.m, she's calling her dad to come into the Bowery and help her unlock the door and see what's going on. And these were just very young women thrown into situations that I don't know that I could have survived and gotten through and stayed with the men as many of them did.
Another one was Scott Weiland from Stone Temple Pilots. A great band, great frontman, great singer, charisma. He passed away December 3rd, 2015, at 48 years old. He had a drug overdose, but again, I was shocked when I heard that one as well. His significant other, Jamie Weiland, what was that like talking to her? Because he's like ingrained in my brain from like the early 90s up until he passed away.
Yeah, yeah, and such a charismatic person. But again, also a kind of quiet, very introspective person. Scott wrote a memoir, which is also very interesting. And I quote from that in my book. He was an altar boy and a Boy Scout and grew up in Cleveland and then ended up on the West Coast, and just knew that he wanted to be on the stage, but I think battled some insecurity. First time he was, in a kind of big show on a big stage, the guy shows up with a white envelope with drugs inside, and he says, "This is it. You rock star, or you not a rock star?" And that he made that decision that kind of dogged him for the rest of his life. And Jamie is just the most lovely person. She's a photographer. She, again, was one of those women who set aside her career because she needed to be there managing Scott and taking care of him while he was on the road and off the road and trying to keep him straight. And he I think battled some kind of schizophrenia and some other issues that were maybe not very well diagnosed. Some of the stories that she tells about being with him and the conversations they have, really, I think she did as much as humanly possible to really care for him, and her love for him is very obvious, and she was so proud of him as a musician. But yeah, a troubled soul, and that's some of the most creative people. That's what they deal with, I think. And he was certainly a very creative person, and just a tremendous writer, songwriter. Yeah, his memoir is really wonderful. He was a very good writer. So yeah, highly recommend that book.
Yeah.
But it's just, I don't know that you'll ever understand someone like that, you know.
Yeah, when they came out in the early '90s, Stone Temple Pilots with the bands from Seattle, Pearl Jam, and Nirvana,
Yeah.
they just really that was my favorite band from Seattle, Stone Temple Pilots, and just he was awesome in the videos. You could see the energy, the connection he had. Never saw him in concert, but I can just tell you he had that connection with the music. Anytime I hear a Stone Temple Pilots song, any musician, you hear their songs now and they've passed away. It's always like it's like they're there. It's like they're still around, but you have that little snapshot in time, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. And for the widows, it kind of keeps them in that place too. You know, it makes it difficult to move on when the music is always there and there's always kind of something going on. Judy Van Zant talks about how often she's walking through the grocery store and Sweet Home Alabama comes on. And then what do? You just keep going with it, and or Freebird. I mean, Freebird even more, but still is an anthem today. And so yeah, having that music there all the time is something that we don't think about. You know, I have to be kind of purposeful if I want to really think about my husband. Of course, I think about him all the time, but I don't have these outside forces that just cause him to be there. And these people do. Photos, there's all kinds of books, there's music, of course. And so it is, I think that makes it a little bit harder for them to move on in ways that we don't understand. There's so many things that they deal with that I never had to deal with, that we just don't understand at all.
How's the reception been for the book? How's it been received?
It's been great. I hope that everyone included is happy with the book. And it's been out for almost a year now, or a little over a year actually. And I've had some book tour events and some other events, and it's really been, yeah, tremendous. And so, yeah, it's been wonderful. The publishing side of things is a little tricky. I'm now onto another publisher. So that the business side of it, you just have to kind of deal with. And I'm still in touch with many of the widows. And so it's really, yeah, it's been a great experience.
Well, people love nostalgia. The music from the '60s, '70s, '80s, '90s. People love nostalgia when they hear and I think that's what draws people this book here. They just like hearing the stories behind the scenes. I have met one rock star frontman for the Smithereens, Pat D'Annunzio. Back in 2000, he was doing a concert at a ballpark I was working at in New Jersey, minor league ballpark. And he was running for Senate in New Jersey. And he had a bumper sticker. He goes from the Smithereens to the U.S. Senate, but he didn't win. But he could not have been nicer. He signed the bumper sticker for me. I have it a little as a keepsake, but he was pretty cool. I was like, man, I loved you in the late. I was a fanboy when I met him, so I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's And it's been really interesting to hear those stories from off the stage and to hear what these men were like when they weren't on stage performing, because they were pretty regular people for the most part and had good relationships. Some of them had difficult relationships. If they had kids, they really seemed to dote on their kids. And so, yeah, it's interesting to see the sometimes the differences that were the case with people on stage versus off stage.
That is fascinating. It's just like backstage, front in front of the fans. I'm always, how would you say, amazed how like a singer or a band can go out in front of 80,000 people and just do what they do, like we do our everyday jobs. It just blows my mind. I'd freeze if I was in front of 80,000 people. So that's
Yeah,
they have that DNA or that it factor to do what they
they
do,
do.
and it's
Yeah,
hard
they
work
do.
too. It's hard work too.
It
So
is. It is. Yeah. Physically grueling and emotional work, I think. And yeah, I think we don't kind of give them credit for what they do every night when they're on tour. And touring is so much a part now of making money and more so, especially now with streaming. You've got to be out there on the road, you've got to be selling merch, you've got to, it's a kind of, the business model has shifted quite a bit, and so that it really does take its toll, I think.
I have a Sirius satellite radio, and I get on the app, you get all these extra channels of the decades, and that's all I listen to. It just
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
Love it. Do you have any other books coming out, or are you working on any other projects?
Not at the moment. I do still have some interviews that didn't make it into this book, so hopefully there might yet be a volume two.
Hi.
Uh, but yeah, we'll see. Some great people that didn't quite make it into this one, so hopefully we'll get that going soon.
That'd be awesome. So my guest tonight has been Lori Tucker-Sullivan. She's been a guest on my podcast. It was a tremendous look at what she was talking to the wives and the girlfriends of rock stars who passed away. She shared her life as well. The name of the book is I Can't Remember If I Cried, Rock Widows on Life, Love, and Legacy. Lori, this has been a fascinating talk about your book and the research you did for it. And I really enjoyed this conversation. I know it means a lot to you. And I thank you very much for coming on my podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rob. Great questions, and I really enjoy talking about it with you. Yeah, thank you.